001, cold open, black screen, sound of distant radio chatter. NASA control, archival tone, Roger, go at throttle up. Narrator, January 28, 1986. A freezing morning at Cape Canaveral. Millions of Americans are watching live television. Children sit cross-legged on classroom floors across the country. Teachers wheel televisions into schoolrooms. Parents pause work to watch history unfold. Because today is supposed to be inspiring. A teacher is going to space. 73 seconds later, the Space Shuttle Challenger explodes over the Atlantic Ocean. And for several horrifying moments, almost nobody understands what they are actually seeing. Cut to imagine plume in sky. Some think the shuttle separated normally. Some think communications failed. Some think the crew might still be alive. But behind the scenes, NASA engineers had already warned the shuttle might explode before launch. And the most terrifying part of all, the warning was ignored. Tonight you're going to see how one of the most advanced organizations on Earth slowly convinced itself to accept a disaster everyone feared was coming. Title card: The Challenger Explosion, 73 seconds that changed America forever. 1000, Chapter 1, America Falls in Love with Space. Narrator: To understand Challenger, you first need to understand America during the 1980s. Because by 1986, space no longer felt impossible, it felt normal. And that was the problem. Only 17 years earlier, astronauts walked on the moon for the first time. The Apollo era transformed NASA into something larger than a government agency. NASA became mythological, astronauts became celebrities, rocket launches became national events. Space represented the future itself. Cut to crowds watching launches. And when the Space Shuttle program began, NASA promised something revolutionary. Not occasional moon missions, routine space travel. The shuttle was supposed to change everything. Reusable spacecraft, frequent launches, lower costs, regular missions. NASA wanted spaceflight to feel ordinary, like commercial aviation. That idea captured America's imagination immediately. The shuttle looked futuristic, elegant, powerful. Unlike the brutal rockets of Apollo, the shuttle almost looked friendly. Children built models of it. Schools taught lessons about it. Television networks covered launches live. The message was clear. The future had arrived. But behind the optimism, NASA engineers were already seeing dangerous warning signs. The shuttle system was unbelievably complicated. Millions of moving parts, extreme temperatures, violent mechanical stress, and unlike airplanes, there was almost no room for error. One failed component could destroy everything. Still, launches continued, again and again and again, and slowly, NASA leadership began developing a dangerous confidence. Each successful launch reinforced the illusion that the system was safer than it actually was. The shuttle did not become safe because it survived danger. It became dangerous because people got used to surviving it. And then NASA made a decision that would emotionally connect the shuttle program to millions of ordinary Americans forever. They decided to send a teacher into space. Her name was Christa McAuliffe, a social studies teacher from New Hampshire, 37 years old. Energetic, charismatic, relatable. She did not look like a traditional astronaut, and that was exactly why America loved her. NASA launched the Teacher in Space program to inspire students and rebuild public excitement around space exploration. Thousands applied. Christa won. Suddenly, space no longer belonged only to elite test pilots and military astronauts. Now ordinary Americans could imagine themselves aboard the shuttle too. Cut to classrooms. Children became emotionally invested in Challenger mission immediately. Teachers planned special lessons around the launch. Schools prepared live broadcasts. Students wrote essays imagining space travel. For many children, this would become first shuttle launch they ever watched live. And Christa understood the responsibility. She recorded messages for students, prepared educational lessons from orbit, spoke enthusiastically about exploration and curiosity. She represented optimism, not military competition, not Cold War fear, hope. and that emotional connection would soon make the disaster infinitely more traumatic. Meanwhile, inside NASA, another reality existed completely separate from the smiling television appearances. Engineers were becoming increasingly nervous about the shuttle itself, especially one component, the solid rocket boosters. More specifically, the O-rings, tiny rubber seals designed to prevent catastrophic hot gas leaks during launch. Small part, massive consequences. Some engineers had already observed alarming warning signs during previous missions. Burn marks, seal erosion, unexpected behavior. The evidence suggested something terrifying. The O-rings might fail completely under the wrong conditions, and Challenger was about to launch under the coldest conditions in shuttle history. Bridge. The night before launch, a group of engineers desperately tried to stop it. Chapter 3. The warning nobody wanted to hear. Darker tone. Narrator January 27, 1986. The night before launch. Temperatures at Cape Canaveral are dropping dangerously low. Ice forms around the launch pad, and engineers from Morton Thiokol, the company responsible for the solid rocket boosters, are becoming deeply alarmed. One engineer in particular cannot ignore the risk. Roger Boisjoli. He has spent years warning management about the O-ring problem. Years. And now, the cold weather makes him believe disaster is possible. Not theoretical. Possible tomorrow morning. The concern was simple. Rubber becomes less flexible in freezing temperatures. If the O-rings fail to seal properly during ignition, superheated gas could escape. And if that happens, the shuttle could be destroyed. That evening, engineers hold emergency conference calls with NASA officials. They argue passionately against launching. Data is presented. Concerns are repeated. Warnings become increasingly urgent. Some engineers explicitly state they believe the shuttle should not launch below certain temperatures, and Challenger is already below them. For a brief moment, the launch appears doomed. Then the meeting changes. NASA leadership pushes back aggressively. Managers question the data. Schedules are discussed. Pressure rises. And slowly, the conversation shifts away from safety toward justification. Instead of asking, "Is this safe enough to launch?" the question quietly becomes, "Can we prove it is unsafe?" That difference changes everything. Disasters often begin the moment organizations stop listening to the people closest to the danger. Eventually, Morton Thiokol management reverses its own engineers. The recommendation changes. Launch approved. Roger Boisjoli sits in silence. Later, he would say he felt physically sick, because deep down he believed people might die the next morning. Bridge. And then morning arrived. 32 minutes to 45 minutes. Chapter 4. Countdown. Cold ambient music. Narrator January 28, 1986. Cape Canaveral. The temperature drops into freezing conditions overnight. Ice covers parts of the launch structure. Photographs taken that morning still look surreal today. Icicles hanging from launch equipment beside one of the most advanced machines humanity had ever built. Even some NASA personnel are uneasy. But by now, the machinery of the launch is already moving forward. Television crews prepare live coverage. Schools across America turn on televisions. Families gather to watch. Kristen McAuliffe's parents are there. Her husband is there. Millions of children are waiting. And psychologically, something dangerous is happening inside NASA. The organization has launched successfully so many times that abnormal conditions begin feeling survivable. Risk becomes normalized. Warning signs become routine. The absence of previous catastrophe creates illusion of safety. But Challenger is already damaged before it even leaves the ground. Inside the freezing temperatures, the O-rings are hardening, losing flexibility, becoming less capable of sealing correctly during ignition. And nobody watching television has any idea. Cut to countdown clock. 10, 9, 8. The engines ignite. Massive flames erupt beneath the shuttle. Vibration tears through the launch structure, and Challenger rises into the sky. At first, everything appears normal. The shuttle climbs beautifully into the clear blue morning, Crowds cheer. Children watch in awe. Mission Control sounds calm. NASA believes the launch survived its most dangerous moments. But hidden near the base of one solid rocket booster, something catastrophic has already begun. Chapter 5, 73 Seconds. Narrator. At exactly 73 seconds after liftoff, the shuttle Challenger dies. But the people watching live television do not understand that yet, because the explosion does not initially look like explosion. It looks strange, confusing, almost abstract against the bright blue Florida sky. White trails split apart violently across the atmosphere. A massive cloud blooms outward. The shuttle disappears inside it. And for a few horrifying seconds, nobody speaks clearly. Mission Control freezes. Television commentators stumble through confusion. Families stare upward without understanding what they are seeing. Inside NASA control rooms, engineers immediately realize something catastrophic has happened. Telemetry vanishes, data disappears, communication dies, the shuttle is gone. But what actually destroyed Challenger happened milliseconds before the explosion itself. The freezing temperatures hardened the O-rings exactly as engineers feared. At launch, a tiny puff of black smoke escaped from the right solid rocket booster. For a brief moment, aluminum residue partially sealed the gap. But as Challenger climbed higher, the pressure intensified. Then came strong wind shear. The shuttle flexed violently. The temporary seal failed, and superheated gas began cutting through the booster assembly like blowtorch. Flames struck the external fuel tank. Hydrogen ignited. Structural failure became unstoppable. And then, the entire shuttle stack tore apart at nearly Mach 2. Long pause. The crew cabin did not instantly vaporize. That detail haunted investigators later, because evidence suggested the astronauts may have survived the initial breakup, at least briefly. Nobody knows exactly what they experienced during the final moments, only that the crew cabin continued climbing upward after the explosion, before eventually falling toward the Atlantic Ocean. Back on the ground, spectators continue staring into the sky. Children inside classrooms watch teachers trying to understand events in real time. Some students begin crying, others remain silent, because the human brain struggles processing disaster while disaster is still unfolding. Quotable, for a few terrible seconds, America watched tragedy before it understood tragedy had happened. NASA commentator Steve Nesbitt finally speaks words that instantly become part of history. Flight controllers here looking very carefully at the situation. Obviously, a major malfunction. Major malfunction, as if language itself cannot yet accept reality. Bridge. And then came the silence afterward. 57-hour to 68-hour. Chapter 6. Live television horror. Narrator. What made Challenger uniquely traumatic was not only the explosion itself, it was the fact that millions witnessed it live together. This was not historical footage discovered later. This was happening in real time. Children watched it happen inside classrooms. Parents watched it during work breaks. Families watched it together from living rooms across America. The emotional shock spread instantly through television screens. And unlike modern internet culture, people in 1986 were not emotionally prepared for this kind of live catastrophe. There were no viral clips, no endless online footage, no social media reactions. This felt different, raw, public, national, and perhaps most haunting of all, many children watching Challenger trusted NASA completely. To them, astronauts were heroes. The shuttle represented safety, progress, the future. And now they had just witnessed that future explode in front of them, live. Teachers later described classrooms falling completely silent. Some students asked whether the astronauts survived. Others simply stared at the television, unable to speak. And because Krista McAuliffe was teacher herself, the emotional connection became devastatingly personal. America was not only losing astronauts, America was losing someone who felt familiar, approachable, human. Cut to imagined classroom televisions. Meanwhile, television networks continue replaying the footage again and again. The explosion, the smoke trails, the crowd reactions, repeated endlessly across national broadcasts. Each replay deepens the trauma. At NASA, confusion quickly transforms into crisis. Officials struggle controlling information. Families wait desperately for answers. Recovery operations begin almost immediately, and inside the organization, many engineers already know the terrifying truth. The disaster was preventable. Quotable: Challenger did not explode because nobody saw the danger. Challenger exploded because people learned how to live beside the danger. Search crews begin scanning the Atlantic Ocean for debris. Eventually, they recover pieces of the shuttle, then parts of the crew cabin, then human remains. The emotional weight becomes unbearable for many recovery workers, because Challenger is no longer engineering failure, it is now human tragedy. Bridge. And soon the investigation would expose how deeply NASA had failed long before the launch ever began. 68 hours to 79 hours. Chapter 7, The Investigation. Darker investigative tone. Narrator: After Challenger explodes, President Ronald Reagan forms special investigative team known as the Rogers Commission. And almost immediately, the investigation uncovers disturbing truth. NASA had been warned, repeatedly. Engineers testify about O-ring concerns. Documents reveal previous warnings. Internal memos expose growing anxiety inside parts of the shuttle program. The deeper investigators look, the worse it becomes. Hook. Challenger was not caused by one unexpected mistake. It was caused by culture. One of the most important figures in the investigation becomes physicist Richard Feynman. Brilliant, blunt, impossible to manipulate. Feynman quickly realizes NASA leadership is publicly presenting unrealistic safety claims. At one point, NASA managers describe shuttle failure odds as incredibly tiny, something like 1 in 100,000. Feynman is stunned because engineers privately estimate the actual risk much higher, possibly closer to 1 in 100. That difference is not small. It is enormous, and it reveals terrifying disconnect inside the organization. Leadership begins believing its own optimism. Then comes one of the most famous moments in engineering history. During televised hearing, Feynman performs simple demonstration. He places piece of O-ring material into ice water, then removes it. The rubber remains stiff. Cold destroys flexibility. The exact problem engineers warned about before launch. Simple, visual, devastating. America suddenly understands the horrifying reality. This was not mysterious accident. The danger was known. Quotable: The Challenger disaster was not born in 73 seconds. It was born in every meeting where warnings became inconvenient. Investigators eventually conclude that NASA developed dangerous culture of normalization. Small failures became accepted. Warning signs became routine. Pressure to maintain launch schedules slowly overpowered caution. And perhaps most disturbing of all, many people inside the system genuinely believed they were making reasonable decisions. That is how institutional disasters often happen, not through evil, through gradual acceptance of risk. But behind all the engineering discussions, real families were left carrying unbearable grief. 79 to 8700. Chapter 8. The Human Cost. Emotional slower tone. Narrator: 7 people died aboard Challenger. Francis Scobie, Michael Smith, Ronald McNair, Ellison Onizuka, Judith Resnick, Gregory Jarvis, Krista McAuliffe. Each one carried dreams into that shuttle. Families, children, plans for future. And in 73 seconds, all of it vanished. For Krista McAuliffe's students, the trauma became lifelong memory. Many later admitted they still remember exact feeling inside classroom when Challenger exploded live on television. The confusion, the silence, the teacher crying, the realization something irreversible had happened. For an entire generation, Challenger became moment childhood innocence cracked. Meanwhile, NASA itself changes permanently. The shuttle fleet is grounded for nearly 3 years. Launch procedures are redesigned. Engineering oversight becomes stricter. Public trust collapses, but emotionally, something deeper changes too. America stops seeing spaceflight as routine. The illusion disappears. And tragically, the warning would not fully be learned forever. 17 years later, another shuttle explodes during re-entry. Columbia, another preventable disaster, another investigation, another culture problem, history repeating itself. Because Challenger was never only about faulty rubber seals, it was about what happens when institutions slowly become comfortable ignoring danger, when pressure becomes more powerful than caution, when success creates illusion of invulnerability. Quotable, institutions rarely collapse from one catastrophic mistake. They collapse after small warnings become ordinary enough to ignore. Bridge, and perhaps that is why Challenger still matters today. 87 minutes, 90 minutes outro, the real warning of Challenger narrator. The Challenger explosion lasted only few seconds, but the silence afterward lasted years. Today, most people remember the smoke trails across the sky, the explosion, the live television footage, the shock, but the deeper story is harder to see. Challenger was warning about human behavior itself, about what happens when organizations begin prioritizing momentum over truth, when schedules matter more than concerns, when optimism becomes dangerous, when people closest to the risk stop being heard. And perhaps that is why the disaster still feels relevant decades later, because Challenger was not simply space tragedy, it was human tragedy, a story about intelligent people slowly convincing themselves everything was safe, right until the moment it exploded in front of the world. The astronauts trusted the system, the public trusted the system, even many inside NASA trusted the system, and that trust shattered over the Atlantic Ocean in 73 seconds. Yet despite everything, humanity kept exploring space because exploration itself was never the mistake. Ignoring warnings was. Final pause. If this story affected you, leave your thoughts below, because Challenger was not only disaster from the past, it was a reminder that progress without honesty can become catastrophe, and a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous moment inside any institution is the moment people begin believing failure is impossible. Fade out. Extended epilogue. Final reflection. Narrator. In the years after Challenger, many NASA engineers quietly admitted something painful. The technical failure was complicated, but the human failure was simple. People stopped being afraid of the warnings. Not because the warnings disappeared, because they became familiar. And familiarity can become dangerous, especially inside systems built around pressure, deadlines, prestige, and public expectation. That is what makes Challenger timeless. The disaster did not happen because nobody cared. Many people cared deeply. Many engineers fought desperately to stop the launch. But eventually, the system itself became stronger than the warnings inside it. And history shows this pattern again and again. Small compromises, minor ignored risks, tiny warning signs treated as acceptable because catastrophe has not happened yet. Until one day, it does. Perhaps that is the most uncomfortable truth hidden inside the Challenger disaster. The people involved were not villains. They were professionals, experienced, intelligent, dedicated, and still, they made decisions that killed 7 people live on television. That reality frightens people because it means catastrophic failure does not always come from evil intentions. Sometimes it comes from ordinary human psychology, pressure, normalization, overconfidence, silence, the slow erosion of caution. The most dangerous systems are often the ones that have survived failure for too long. Today, children still learn about Challenger in schools. Many watch the launch footage for first time and experience same shock people felt in 1986. The countdown, the ascent, the explosion, the confusion afterward. Even decades later, the footage still feels surreal, because human beings instinctively resist watching optimism transform into tragedy so quickly. And perhaps that is why Challenger remains one of the most haunting disasters in modern history. It destroyed more than shuttle. It damaged innocence. The innocence of classrooms watching live television. The innocence of believing advanced institutions always know exactly what they are doing. The innocence of thinking technological progress automatically guarantees safety. But Challenger also left behind something valuable, a warning, a permanent reminder that expertise means nothing if people become afraid to speak honestly. A reminder that institutions fail the moment protecting reputation becomes more important than confronting risk. And a reminder that sometimes the person raising uncomfortable concerns is the person saving lives. Roger Boisjoli spent rest of his life speaking about ethical responsibility in engineering, not because he wanted attention, because he understood something most people do not realize until disaster happens. Technical systems are built by human beings, and human beings are vulnerable to pressure. Schedules create pressure. Politics create pressure. Money creates pressure. Public expectation creates pressure, and slowly, people begin convincing themselves dangerous things are acceptable, until danger becomes normal. That was the real explosion behind Challenger. Not only fuel and fire, but normalization. The normalization of risk. 73 seconds. That is all it took. 73 seconds to destroy a shuttle. 73 seconds to traumatize generation of children. 73 seconds to expose hidden failures inside one of the most respected organizations on Earth. Yet the decisions that caused those 73 seconds were built slowly across years, meeting by meeting, compromise by compromise, warning by warning. And perhaps that is why the story still matters now more than ever. Because Challenger was not only about NASA, it was about human systems everywhere. Governments, corporations, airlines, factories, hospitals, technology companies. Any institution can drift toward danger when people become rewarded for silence instead of honesty. Tonight, the Challenger crew remains frozen in public memory exactly as they appeared before launch, smiling beside the shuttle, waving to cameras, believing they were part of hopeful future. And in many ways, they were, because their deaths forced changes that likely saved future astronauts afterward. That does not erase tragedy, but it gave tragedy meaning. Final reflective pause. The sky above Cape Canaveral is quiet now. The smoke disappeared long ago. The shuttle program itself eventually ended, but the lesson remains. Clear, uncomfortable, permanent. Progress without humility becomes dangerous. Success without caution becomes fragile. And systems that stop listening to warnings eventually create their own disasters. The Challenger explosion lasted seconds, but the warning it left behind may last forever.